Advances in technology that were made during World War II were applied to the production of consumer goods after World War II. There was a rallying cry that good design is good business, and the more perceptive corporate leaders understood the need to develop corporate design programs that would help shape companies' reputations and give a sense of quality and reliability. So visual identification systems during the 1950s went beyond trademarks, which had been in use since medieval guilds, to produce consistent design systems that projected a cohesive image for corporations with an expanding national and multinational presence. During the 50s and the 60s, many American designers embraced corporate identity as a major design activity. It became the focus of a lot of their work. Columbia Broadcasting System, otherwise known as CBS, led the way in corporate identity, and its logo is one of the more successful and lasting trademarks of all time. Unlike NBC and Pepsi-Cola, its logo has not been altered. CBS's approach to corporate identity lay not in consistency in how the trademark was used over a variety of applications, but in the quality and intelligence of each related design solution. CBS hired illustrators who enjoyed a lot of freedom when creating advertising for the corporation and for the various television shows. Proprietary marks, of course, began back in the age of the guilds, and they were used to control trade, basically. In the 20th century, proprietary marks, such as logos and word marks, identified companies and became marks of trade, identifying a particular company within a particular genre of business. Along with logos, logotypes, and word marks, corporate identity standards in a manual form became useful as guidelines and standards for implementing corporate identity programs. Different from just a logo, corporate identity is a system of visual elements that are all related, and they're used in a comprehensive program to convey a consistent image of a company. Paul Rand achieved a strong corporate identification by repeating patterns of blue, green, and magenta capital letters on black package fronts. And that was the standard identity packaging for IBM for a couple of decades. And then the original packaging program was replaced by an updated design using the 8-stripe logo on a red ground. Unimark was an international design firm founded in Chicago in 1965, and they rejected individual design, but believed that design could be a system of basic structures set up so that other people could implement them. The basic tool for this effort was the grid, which standardized all graphic communications for dozens of Unimark clients. Unimark devised the Unigrid, and that's a modular grid system based on an ISO A2, a metric system sizing of paper, and it allowed for a lot of variety of design while keeping a consistent, recognizable structure across all the designs. The system has been very economical and has been used by the National Park System for decades. In a corporate identity system, consistent use of the mark, color, and typeface builds value and recognition through visual redundancy. Chermayeff and Giesmer is a firm that moved at the forefront of the corporate identity movement in 1960 with a comprehensive visual language program for Chase Manhattan Bank. Another of its corporate design programs was for Mobil Oil, in which the name became the trademark with the round red O separating it from the visual presentation of other words. So rather than maintaining design consistency from project to project, the company allowed each solution to evolve from its problem. The Federal Design Improvement Program, initiated in May 1974 by the U.S. government, was a response to a growing awareness that design could be an effective tool for achieving objectives. The initiative was coordinated by the Architectural and Environmental Arts Program of the National Endowment for the Arts. And the program set out to improve the quality of visual communication and the ability of government agencies to communicate effectively. The design firm Manhattan Design, which was noted for its independent risk-taking experimentation, was commissioned by MTV to design a new logo. So they came up with a three-dimensional sans serif M, joined by a graffiti-based TV scrawl, and the logo itself could be altered through a variety of color treatments, decoration, materials, two-dimensionality to three-dimensionality, viewing angles, and motion. It could assume different personalities and participate in animated events and even be blown up. This concept of a logo with a constantly changing persona was contrary to the widely held belief that trademarks and visual identifiers should be absolutely fixed. So it played a major role in redefining visual identity in the electronic age. And now the consistency of electronic identity is that it is animated. It can be changed and still retain its identity and its relevance and its value. Another aspect of design in the mid-century was conceptual illustration. This emerged in Poland, the USA, Germany, and Cuba, and dealt with the design of the entire space, including the integration of word and image, and it conveyed not merely narrative information, but ideas and concepts. Photography and video took over the role of documentation, so graphic illustration became more expressive and symbolic. And during this period, graphic artists created more personal images and pioneered individual styles and techniques, and they blurred the boundaries between fine art and public visual communication. Drawing, collage, hand lettering, painterly brushstrokes, and mixed media were often used in conceptual illustration. Narrative illustration dominated the U.S. graphic design scene for a long time. As photography took over illustration's traditional function, which was to document, a more conceptual approach to illustration emerged among a group of New York graphic artists, Seymour Quast, Milton Glaser, Reynolds Ruffins, and Edward Sorrell. Glaser and Quast united concept, image making, and layout components of graphic design into a total communication that conveyed the individual vision of the creator. Pushpin studio artists drew inspiration and source materials from everything from Renaissance painting to comic books. They freely paraphrased and incorporated multiple ideas into their work, and they often reshaped eclectic sources into new and unexpected forms. The pushpin approach is less a set of visual conventions or unity of visual techniques than it is an attitude about visual communication. They had an openness to trying new forms and techniques as well as reinterpreting work of earlier periods, and they also had an ability to integrate word and image into a conceptual and decorative whole. So the term pushpin style became widely used throughout the world to refer to the studio's work and influence. Pushpin spawned a number of young graphic designers and illustrators, including Barry Zaid, who became a force in revivalism and historicism, Jim McMullen, who restored watercolor as a means of graphic expression and made fluid lettering an important part of his image. There was also Paul Davis, who drew his inspiration from primitive colonial American art and approached the integration of word and image in a painterly manner. A regional school of graphic design, which was influenced by pushpin, emerged in Texas in the 1970s and became a very strong force in the 80s. And this Texas style, the Southwest style, used a lot of graphic pun, such as we see here. In contrast to post-war Polish posters, which were patronized by government agencies as a cultural form, the poster craze in the United States during the 60s was a grassroots affair, and it was fostered by the social upheavals of that decade. Posters from the late 1960 hippie subculture centered in the Haight-Ashbury section of San Francisco, and they were referred to as psychedelic posters because they were related to anti-establishment values, rock music, and psychedelic drugs. Wes Wilson was the innovator of the psychedelic style. Lettering becomes the image, which signifies a cultural and generational shift in values. Design influences for psychedelic art included the flowing, sinuous curves of Art Nouveau, particularly the letter forms of Alfred Roller, intense optical color vibration of op art, made possible by complementary and simultaneous contrasts, and the recycling of images from popular culture or manipulation of images, such as reducing continuous tone images to high contrast black and white. which was also prevalent in pop art, such as in the work of Andy Warhol. The primary clients of psychedelic artists were promoters of rock and roll concerts and other entertainment. So the experience at these events, which included loud music and light shows, manifested itself graphically in swirling form and warped and bent lettering that bordered on illegibility. Another trend was photographic illustration. The medium of photography is manipulated, massaged, montaged, and airbrushed to convert the ordinary into the unexpected. Everyday images were combined or dislocated, then printed as straightforward documentary black and white images in a profound visual statement. Corita Kent entered a convent in Los Angeles, and she gained notoriety for her approach to her spirituality and artistic practice. She combined childlike forms and saturated color, but infused her work with a deeply held faith and appropriated signs, literary text and phrases, song lyrics from her everyday environment, and used these elements in compositing images that assume new meanings. She used her work to not only explore new ideas in design, but also to spread spiritual teachings. Within the context of design, the term postmodernism refers to a shift away from the objectivity of modern design toward a more subjective approach. Postmodernism gained a strong foothold with designers in the 70s, and they turned away from the order and clarity of the international typographic style, which had been prevalent since the Bauhaus, and instead found inspiration in historical references in the vernacular as they sought a broader range of design possibilities. The term postmodernism is rejected by some who see the period merely as a continuation of the modern movement, and these prefer the term late modernism and mannerism instead. Postmodernism visually has a lot of layers. It relies on visual texture. It relies on surprises. It relies on formal versus informal structure. And it basically does what heretofore was unconventional. Overlapping forms, movement, interchanging flat space with volumetric illusion, energizing the space with gestural form is a very postmodern approach to design. In a lot of postmodernism, letter forms retain their legibility, but were transformed into decorative geometric forms. A sub-movement of postmodernism, Memphis design, was characterized by playful geometry, surface pattern, texture, color, and references to earlier cultures, as in this case, pyramids. Other approaches included the use of graphic forms and color, which served the function of a traditional headline, so there wasn't a traditional headline, and a sense of linking lifestyle values to consumer products. There began to be a focus on the benefit of product to the consumer. Another hallmark of postmodern design is repeated patterns and pastel colors. Paula Scher is a prolific designer who draws a lot from history and puts things together in new ways. So she synthesizes contradictory sources, in this case Russian constructivism and the wood-type posters from the 19th century, and in doing so creates something that's quite new and different. And that's something to go to school on. Innovation often results from the merging of disparate elements or ideas. Scher had to often work with tight budgets, so she developed typographic solutions based on imagination. You can see in this poster for CBS Records that she did not copy earlier constructivist styles, but used the vocabulary of forms and form relationships, and she reinvented them and combined them. Her use of space and color are different than constructivism. There is a dense grouping of letter forms in space, which carries the weight and the strength of the wood-type posters. The idea of understanding a vocabulary of a movement or a style deals with understanding the design sensibilities, the types of forms used, and how they were used within the design space, how balance was used, spacing, positioning, and such. Looking at all the design principles and rethinking them. Understanding vocabulary of a design, style, or movement keeps you from being a copyist, because understanding the vocabulary will allow you to innovate.